This is a lateral view of neck showing all the triangles of neck. But to understand them, we first need to know the anatomy of two important muscles of this area, that is the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius. So this video is divided into two parts. Part 1 deals with the anatomy of important muscles and part 2 deals with the triangles, while the contents of each triangle will be dealt separately in the future videos. Let's first look at the anterior view of trapezius. It is a very complex muscle with three kinds of fibers as depicted in this diagram. The important bony landmarks related to trapezius are lateral 1/3 of clavicle, which articulates with the acromion. Acromion has a lateral and a medial border. Then there is spinous process, which has a posterior border called as the crest of spine. Acromion is actually the terminal bulbous extension or continuation of the spinous process. Spinous process originates from a triangular area along the medial border on the dorsal surface of scapula, which is called as the root of spine. With this brief look at the bony landmarks related to trapezius, we are now in a better position to look at the insertion of trapezius. It inserts at lateral 1/3 of clavicle, medial border of acromion, crest of spine, and the root of spine, thus forming a J. So this is the J-shaped insertion of trapezius. Now we can simplify the complex looking first diagram. These are the upper fibers which are inserted into the lateral 1/3 of clavicle. These are the middle fibers which are inserted into the medial border of acromion and the crest of spine. And finally, these are the lower fibers which are inserted into the root of spine. After removing other fibers, we can clearly see the individual fibers. The upper fibers, the middle fibers, and the lower fibers. This is what we have covered till now. All diagrams have been drawn separately to prevent creating a mess on a single diagram. This way you can easily recall the next time you are revising. You can also take a screenshot of this if you want. Next, we will briefly look at the lateral view of trapezius. This is to visualize and solidify in memory the same already discussed points, that is the arrangement of fibers and the J-shaped insertion of trapezius, only by this time from a lateral angle. To this lateral view, we will then superimpose the second important muscle of this area, that is the sternocleidomastoid, and voila, we will have a posterior triangle of neck. This is a lateral view. We can see the lateral 1/3 of clavicle, the acromion, the spinous process, the crest of spine, and the root of spine. These are related to the insertion of trapezius. We can also see the occipital protuberance, the superior nuchal line, the nuchal ligament, the C7 vertebra, and T1 to T12 vertebrae. All these bony landmarks give origin to trapezius. So trapezius has a linear origin but curved J-shaped insertion. This truly reflects the evolution of human tendencies as one becomes older, with babies being cute angels incapable of doing any wrong. But as it becomes an adult, it becomes twisty, dark, cheating, conniving sinner. Enough of this worldly wisdom. Coming back to trapezius, again we can see the upper, middle and lower fibers. But the important thing to notice here is that the upper fibers are forming the anterior border of the trapezius muscle. And the anterior border of trapezius in turn forms the posterior margin of the posterior triangle of neck. Again, we can see the J-shaped insertion of trapezius but from a lateral angle. The dotted line is to acknowledge the fact that the muscle inserts at the medial border of acromion, but we are visualizing from a lateral aspect. This is what we have covered just now. You can also take a screenshot of this if you want. Now we will add sternocleidomastoid over trapezius. We have already covered this, but notice that we have added another important bony landmark, that is the mastoid process. You can touch and feel the occipital protuberance at the back of your head. Now while feeling, move your fingers slightly lateral and below. You have reached the prominence of mastoid process. Connecting these two prominences is the superior nuchal line. Now we can see the SCM muscle. The SCM muscle has a clavicular head and a sternal head. Sternal head is not shown for clarity. Clavicular head originates from the medial one-third of superior surface of clavicle and inserts on the mastoid process and the lateral part of the superior nuchal line. Between these two muscles, the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius, we have the posterior triangle of neck. Posterior margin of SCM forms the anterior border of the posterior triangle, and anterior margin of trapezius forms the posterior border of the posterior triangle of neck. Base is formed by the clavicle. Between the midline of neck and the anterior margin of sternocleidomastoid, we have the anterior triangle. Mandible forms the base, midline of neck forms the medial border, anterior margin of sternocleidomastoid forms the lateral border of anterior triangle of neck. After looking at trapezius and SCM from various angles, we are now in a better position to understand the triangles of neck. Because the triangles of neck are majorly demarcated by three things: the trapezius, the SCM, and the midline. And with contributions from few other small muscles, we can further divide these large triangles into smaller, minor triangles. The important bony landmarks of this area are shown. We have already seen them, with only hyoid bone being the newest entry. The two important muscles and the J-shaped insertion of trapezius. We have already seen these. Only thing is that we have removed some of the fibers of the trapezius muscle. Posterior triangle of neck nestled between the SCM and the trapezius. We have also seen this. Next we add a new muscle, the omohyoid, which divides the posterior triangle into two, the occipital triangle and the subclavian triangle. Let's just also briefly look at the omohyoid muscle. It has a superior belly and an inferior belly. They are joined by an intermediate tendon. Both have an inferior origin and a higher insertion, which means that the inferior belly originates just medial to suprascapular notch and inserts on the intermediate tendon. Similarly, superior belly originates inferiorly from the intermediate tendon to insert higher on the inferior border of the hyoid bone. On adding other muscles, we can now clearly understand how omohyoid muscle further divides the posterior triangle. Finally, we can now easily tell the borders of each of the triangles. So this is what we have covered just now.
Next, we will look at the anterior triangle of neck.
The important bony landmarks of this area are shown. Only new addition is the angle of mandible. Anterior triangle is nestled between the SCM and the midline. We have already seen this. And the omohyoid muscle too. But here it is the superior belly of the omohyoid muscle. So based on what we have already discussed, without adding anything extra, we can see the first subdivision of the anterior triangle of neck. That is the muscular triangle. So you can see in this video a proper sequence is maintained. Next, we will add the last muscle of this area, that is the digastric muscle, which has an anterior belly and a posterior belly. So in front of the anterior belly, or we can say between the anterior belly and the midline, we have the submental triangle. And between the anterior belly and the posterior belly, we have the submandibular triangle, also called as the digastric triangle. Finally, below the submandibular triangle, or we can say below the posterior belly of digastric and above the superior belly of omohyoid, we have the carotid triangle. And it is obvious from the name what will be the contents of the carotid triangle. If you still could not guess it, it is the carotid arteries, the common carotid, its bifurcation, the internal carotid, and the external carotid arteries. Covering these arteries is the carotid sheath, but the carotid sheath does not cover the external carotid artery. Even carotid sinus is present here. So anything that has carotid in its name is present in this triangle. This diagram shows all the subdivisions of the anterior triangle of neck. The borders for each of the triangles is shown. You can pause the video and note them down. With this, we have now come to an end of this lesson. This is an additional information. You can skip it if you want, but this will help you to visualize and link the anatomy of neck and shoulder. We will just add another big muscle, that is the deltoid, to the already studied triangles. We have already seen these triangles. We have now added the deltoid muscle in the view. After cutting some muscles, we can see that both deltoid and trapezius have similar J-shaped attachment on almost the same bony prominences. But note that the deltoid inserts on the deltoid tuberosity on humerus. So here it cannot be the insertion of deltoid, it is the origin. On the other hand, the trapezius inserts here. Therefore, deltoid originates while trapezius inserts in a J-shaped fashion. Outer J is the deltoid origin, inner J is the trapezius insertion. Next, let's look at the posterior view of clavicle, spinous process, and the acromion. Spinous process has a root and a crest. Crest of spine is pyramidal with an upper lip and a lower lip. Acromion has a medial and a lateral border. Upper, middle, and lower fibers of trapezius. This is the whole trapezius muscle. To this, we add the deltoid. For convenience, we have removed some fibers of the deltoid in the next few diagrams. So trap has insertion on root of spine, upper lip of crest of spine, medial border of acromion, and lateral one-third of clavicle. So insertion of trapezius forms the inner J. Deltoid originates from the lower lip of crest of spine, lateral border of acromion, and anterior border of lateral one-third of clavicle. So origin of delt forms the outer J. It then goes forward to arm to insert on the deltoid tuberosity on humerus.